Dad, if you marry her, don't ever call me your daughter again. Harold set the phone down gently on the coffee table. The screen was still lit. His daughter Lisa had just sent a wall of text on Facebook Messenger. Dense paragraphs he couldn't bring himself to read, but the last few lines were burned into his eyes. Dad, if you actually marry that random old woman, don't ever call me your daughter again. Andrew feels the same way. I'm putting my foot down. The living room was quiet. The old pendulum clock on the wall ticked steadily on. His wife had bought that clock over 20 years ago, back when she was still alive, and it had never once broken down. From the kitchen came the sound of running water and the soft clatter of dishes. Susan poked her head out, still holding a couple of scallions, her apron tied neatly at her waist. Her hair was dyed a deep black. She wore a simple beige blouse, and her voice was always gentle. At 65, when she smiled, her eyes still crinkled into little half-moons. Are Andrew and Lisa coming for dinner tonight? I'll pick up an extra fish. I saw a beautiful sea bass at the market this morning, still flopping around. Steamed with ginger and scallions would be perfect. Isn't that your favorite? Harold opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He stood up and walked onto the balcony. Down in the courtyard garden, a few of his old neighbors were doing Tai Chi, familiar faces. He'd lived in this old faculty housing complex most of his life. Before retiring, he'd been the principal of Lincoln High. Plenty of the kids in this neighborhood had been his students. Back then, walking through the complex, people used to call out, "Good afternoon, Principal Chun." Not so much anymore. Old neighbors had moved away, passed on, and most of the faces he saw now were strangers. Still, he kept the habit of standing on the balcony every morning, looking out at the few old sycamore trees that still stood. Harold, Susan wiped her hands and came over. She saw him standing at the balcony door, phone in hand, his face grim. What's wrong? What did the kids say? Dinner tonight, they're not coming. Harold slipped the phone into his pocket and turned back toward the window. Old Mr. Patterson, doing Tai Chi down below, waved up at him. Harold managed a weak smile and nodded back. Susan paused. Her smile faded for just a second, then brightened again, her voice as light as ever. Working late again? They're young. Work gets busy. Totally understandable. Then it's just the two of us. I'll still steam the base. Light and healthy is best for your blood sugar anyway. She turned and went back into the kitchen, and soon the water was running again. Harold stayed on the balcony. The March breeze still carried a chill, ruffling the white hair at his temples. He watched Susan's back as she moved around the kitchen and remembered the first time he'd met her, 6 months ago, at the community center's calligraphy class. He'd shown up late that day. The room was full, and the only empty seat was next to her. He sat down, spread out his rice paper, dipped his brush. She glanced sideways at his first stroke and said, quietly, "Your yin style has good bone structure. It just needs a little more fluidity." Later, he learned that she'd worked for years at the city's cultural affairs office and had beautiful handwriting herself. After retiring, she'd opened a tiny art studio, teaching a handful of kids. She wasn't loud. When she wrote, she was utterly serene. But every time she spoke, it put him at ease, like she'd known him forever. After she came into his life, the 10 empty years of his retirement suddenly had color again. There was someone to eat breakfast with, someone to walk with in the evenings, someone to talk to while watching TV, instead of sitting alone in a living room that felt bigger and emptier every day. Susan. Harold walked back inside and stood in the kitchen doorway. She was scaling the fish, her movements quick and sure, the blade flashing as the scales flicked away. "My kids, they might have some concerns," he said, and the words felt like a brick on his chest. Susan's hands paused for just a moment, then kept moving. She didn't look up. Her voice was calm. "That's normal. A new person suddenly appears. Everyone needs time to adjust. My son wasn't happy about it at first either. But these things can't be rushed. Slowly, it'll work out." The doorbell rang. Harold opened the door. His son, Andrew, stood outside, not stepping in, holding a box of supplements. Andrew's wife, Grace, hovered behind him, her eyes sweeping the entryway and lingering on the light gray woman's jacket hanging on the coat rack. Susan's jacket. The two of them had picked it out together at the mall last week. "Dad," Andrew handed him the box. "Calcium chews. Remember to take them. The doctor at your last checkup said your bone density's low. Come in, sit. Dinner's almost ready. Eat with us." "Can't. I've got a thing. Work dinner. Andrew stood motionless, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. It was his tell, the nervous habit he'd had since he was a kid. 30 years later, he still couldn't shake it. Dad, you need to reconsider this whole thing. Lisa talked to me. And look, don't say we're being harsh. You're 73 years old. Why stir up drama? Can't you just live quietly? What do you really know about this Susan's background? Where do her kids work? What's her pension? Does she own property? We don't want you getting scammed, left with nothing. It happens all the time now. Grace jumped in, her tone even more urgent than her husband's. Exactly, Dad. There are women out there who specifically target elderly men living alone. Just last month, the news had a story about an old man over on the east side, 70s, just like you. Got conned out of his house by some woman who came from out of state. Now she's vanished, the house is sold, and he's in a nursing home crying his eyes out. We're not against you finding a companion. We just don't want you to get taken. Harold's face darkened. A draft blew through the hallway, cold against his collar. He gripped the door handle, his knuckles going white. Susan isn't like that. We've been together 6 months. I know what kind of person she is. You never really know, Andrew said, his voice hardening, his chin lifting slightly in that stubborn way that meant he wouldn't budge. He'd been like this since childhood. Once he dug his heels in, nothing could move him. I've said my piece. Dad, if you go through with marrying her, don't come calling me when you're sick in the hospital. Lisa won't be there either. We're not people you can just brush off. We have boundaries. He turned and walked away, his dress shoes echoing dully on the concrete hallway floor. Grace followed, took 2 steps, then turned back to add, Dad, we're only thinking of you. Think about Mom. The door clicked shut. Harold stood there. The box of supplements in his hand felt heavy as a brick. The pendulum clock in the living room struck 3 times. 3 o'clock exactly. The water in the kitchen stopped. Susan emerged, holding a half-dried plate. Her expression was composed, but Harold noticed she had already untied her apron and folded it neatly on the back of a dining chair. I heard, maybe I should go back to my place for a few days. Give the kids some time to cool off, she said, her voice still that same gentle, unhurried tone. But Harold could hear the hurt she was pressing down. No, Harold set the supplements on the shoe cabinet and turned to face her. You stay here. You're not going anywhere. But the kids, they listened to me for 30 years. Do I owe it to them to listen to them now? Harold stopped, surprised at his own words. He'd never talked like that before. As a principal, he'd been famous for his patience, never raising his voice, treating everyone with kindness. After retiring, he'd become even more easygoing. Words like that, coming out of his own mouth, felt foreign. He sat back down on the sofa, fingers tapping his knee, his old thinking habit, decades old. Susan sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance. She didn't speak, just quietly kept him company. After a long silence, Harold said, Next Saturday is my birthday. Whether they like it or not, they'll come. We'll all sit down and have a meal, and I'll talk to them properly. Susan nodded. All right, I'll make a few dishes. Don't you love sweet and sour pork? I'll make that, and some chicken soup. Harold looked at her. A 65-year-old woman, with fine lines like river deltas at the corners of her eyes. But those eyes were extraordinarily bright. She was always like this. Whatever happened, her first thought was always for someone else. You don't deserve this, he said. Susan smiled, a little bitter, but mostly carrying the clear-eyed acceptance of someone who'd seen it all. What's there to feel wronged about? At my age, I've heard every unkind word there is. When I was a young widow, Michael was only 10. The things the neighbors said then were far worse. I got through it. She went back into the kitchen. Soon, the water was running again, and the steady thunk of a knife on the cutting board resumed. Harold picked up his phone, scrolled to Andrew's number, and let his thumb hover over the call button for a long time. Then he scrolled to Lisa's. He didn't call either one. He opened the family group chat. There were over a dozen unread messages. He opened it. Lisa had forwarded an article, the title screaming in bold red letters. Beware the Twilight Scam. How to protect elderly loved ones from predators. The article included a stock photo of a white-haired old man sitting alone in an empty room, next to a torn-up marriage certificate. Beneath it, his nephews and nieces had chimed in. Uncle Harold, stay safe. Grandpa, be careful. So many scammers out there. No one had mentioned him, but every single message felt like it was aimed directly at him. Harold closed the app and shut off his phone. The screen went dark, reflecting his own tired face. Outside the balcony, dusk was slowly falling, a gray-blue haze creeping up between the buildings, blurring the lights of the distant TV tower. The smell of steaming fish drifted from the kitchen, fragrant with scallions and ginger. He suddenly thought back to 30 years ago, to his wife holding his hand on her hospital bed, making him promise something. It had been autumn. Sycamore leaves blanketed the ground outside the window. His wife lay in bed, pale, but utterly at peace. She held his hand and said, "Harold, if someday you meet someone right, don't force yourself to be alone. The kids will have their own lives. They'll grow up, start their own families. They can't stay by your side forever. If you can find a companion, I'd rest easier." Back then, Andrew was 15 and in full teenage rebellion. Lisa was 12 with her hair in 2 little pigtails. He'd sat beside that hospital bed, holding his wife's hand, completely unable to speak. Now Andrew was 45, Lisa 42. They'd reached the exact age he'd been then. But they'd forgotten everything. 3 days before his birthday, Lisa showed up. No call, no warning. She used her own key to let herself in. She'd kept a key to the old house all these years, the one her mother had given her. Susan was in the living room arranging flowers. The new lilies on the windowsill were in full bloom, and she had a pair of scissors in her hand, trimming stems. Hearing the lock turn, she looked up, still holding a freshly cut lily. "Susan, you're here." Lisa swapped her shoes for house slippers. Her tone as flat as if greeting a total stranger, her eyes already scanning the room past Susan. "Where's my dad?" "Downstairs getting the mail. He'll be right back. The evening paper was late today." Susan set down the flower and wiped her hands on her apron. "Lisa, have a seat. I'll make you some tea. We just got some jasmine green. Your dad said you like green tea." "Don't bother." Lisa sat on the sofa without removing her jacket. She surveyed the room like an appraiser. New curtains, pale blue with a subtle pattern, nothing like the floral print her mother used to love. Several pots of orchids on the balcony, planted in expensive-looking clay pots. On the TV stand, a photo of Harold and Susan together, taken at the park, both smiling with a pond full of lotus flowers behind them. That photo sat exactly where the old family portrait used to be. Lisa stared at that photo for a long time. Susan set a cup of tea on the coffee table. The porcelain clinked softly against the glass. Lisa didn't touch it. "Susan, let's be direct," Lisa said, her voice utterly calm, as if negotiating a contract. "Exactly how far has this thing between you and my dad gone?" Susan sat down in the armchair, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight. Years of working at the cultural office, dealing with all sorts of people, had given her a steady, unflappable presence. "Hasn't your father told you? He says he wants to marry you." Lisa repeated the word slowly, as if chewing on something bitter. "Susan, I'm not unreasonable, but you have to understand how this looks to us. My dad's getting old. His judgment isn't always sharp. 3 years ago, he got conned out of $3,000 buying bogus supplements. Last year, someone talked him into a shady investment, and he lost $5,000. His pension is good, but that doesn't mean it's there for the taking. We have to look out for him." "I understand. Children looking out for their parents. That's only natural." "Good. I'm glad you understand." Lisa pulled a notebook out of her purse and flipped it open. It was a sleek black leather business notebook that looked completely out of place in this old house. She turned to a page filled with dense handwriting. "Susan, I won't beat around the bush. I've done some digging on you. You retired from the city cultural affairs office, correct? Regular staff, not a director position. Your pension is around $1,200 a month. Your son, he's abroad somewhere? Doing what exactly isn't very clear. Some say the US, some say Canada. You live in a small condo on the old side of town, maybe 800 square feet, nearly 30 years old, and the mortgage isn't paid off, is it?" Susan didn't deny any of it. She took a sip of water from her own glass, her fingers perfectly steady. "That's right. So you see, we have to lay the cards on the table." Lisa closed the notebook and leaned forward, fingers interlaced on her knees. A negotiating posture. "My dad's pension is over $4,000 a month. This house was part of his compensation package from the school district. It's worth over $500,000 now. There are savings, I don't know the exact amount, but at least a couple $100,000. Susan, If you marry my dad, how do we handle all that? Lisa, Susan's voice was still gentle, unhurried, like the rhythm of her calligraphy. I'm not with your father for any of that. I have my own pension, my own place. I'm not here to take your family's assets. That's what they all say. Lisa smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Susan, we're both adults. Let's be practical. I'll give you two options. One, you break up with my dad, and I'll give you $10,000. Call it a thank you for the 6 months you've spent cooking and looking after him. I recognize you've put in effort. Two, you can keep seeing each other, but you can never get legally married. He can cover the daily expenses, but you sign a legal agreement waiving all rights to any inheritance. The house, the savings, his pension, any assets in his name. You don't touch a penny. Sign the agreement, and you two can do whatever you want. I won't interfere. But if you think you can marry your way into a slice of our family's money, Lisa slid the notebook back into her purse. Then don't blame me for what comes next. The front door opened. Harold stood in the doorway, the rolled-up evening paper in his hand, his face ashen. The veins at his temples were visible, and the hand holding the paper was trembling. He didn't say a word. He had clearly heard enough. Dad. Lisa stood up, her expression shifting from controlled to uneasy. Get out, Harold said. His voice wasn't loud, but every syllable seemed forced through clenched teeth. He set the newspaper on the shoe cabinet with deliberate slowness, as if containing a tremendous force. Lisa's face changed, but her voice stayed hard. Dad, I'm doing this for your own good. Just listen. I said get out. Harold's voice still wasn't loud. It trembled, not with fear, but with the heartbreak of a 73-year-old man whose own child had wounded him to the core. He walked over, picked up the notebook she had put down, and turned to the page of notes about Susan. He read it from top to bottom. Then he ripped it out. The sound of tearing paper sliced through the silence. The shreds fluttered to the floor like a tiny, bitter snowfall. Lisa stared at them, her lips trembling. My business is none of yours to investigate, Harold said, his voice finally rising. I know exactly who Susan is. In 6 months, she's been here every day cooking for me, walking with me, taking me to doctor's appointments. And where were you? You don't even remember that I hate cilantro. You investigated her. What gives you the right? What do you really know? Lisa's voice went shrill, her eyes reddening with fury, not hurt. Mom's only been gone 10 years, and you're already rushing to replace her. What about Mom? How did you treat her when she was alive? When she was in the hospital, you were too busy with school stuff to sit with her. Andrew and I took turns at her bedside. And now you're treating a stranger better than you ever treated her. Your mother, on her deathbed, told me to find someone. Harold roared. It was loud, so loud it shocked even himself. The living room went completely still. The clock ticked. A bird called outside. A delivery truck beeped somewhere in the distance and faded away. Lisa froze, her mouth open, the anger on her face freezing into something she couldn't name. Susan stood up, gently taking Harold's arm. Harold, don't get worked up. Your blood pressure. Sit down, let's talk slowly. He shook off her hand, not from anger, but because he needed to stand. He needed to stand and say everything that had been trapped inside him for 10 years. He pointed at his daughter, his fingers shaking in the air. You and your brother. How many times have you come to see me these past few years? Once a month? And you stay less than half an hour, complaining about work or asking for money for your kids. I was in the hospital for 3 days. Did either of you take a single night shift? It was Susan who stayed with me. 65 years old, and she didn't leave my bedside for 3 days. You didn't even call. We were busy. Lisa's voice had gone very small. Busy? Harold laughed, his eyes red-rimmed, a smile more painful than tears. Yes, you're busy. Busy enough to investigate Susan, but not busy enough to have a meal with me. Busy enough to find a lawyer and figure out how to split the assets, but not busy enough to ask me if my blood pressure is okay or if I'm sleeping at night. You just offered me $10,000. $10,000. Do you really think your father's happiness is worth $10,000? Lisa snatched up her purse and clutched it to her chest. Fine. Fine. I can't argue with you. But I'm telling you now, if you marry her, I have no father anymore. Don't call me when you're sick. Don't call me on holidays. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me. She slammed the door so hard the frame rattled and the echo bounced down the hallway. The neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Kowalski, cracked her door open for a peek and then quickly pulled it shut. Harold stood there, his shoulders sagging. All the fire from a moment ago had drained out, leaving behind just a tired old man of 73. Susan guided him to the couch, went to get him some water. Her hands were shaking a little, and she spilled a few drops on the coffee table. She wiped at it with a cloth, over and over, as if that water spot could never be erased. Susan, Harold took the glass, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to see that. It's okay. She sat beside him, handed him a tissue. The kids just need time. They're not bad people. They're just scared. It's not that they don't understand, Harold said. He sipped the water. They're afraid. Afraid of my money, my house, falling into the hands of an outsider. In their eyes, I'm not their father anymore. I'm their inheritance. Harold, let me finish. He set the cup down, his fingers still trembling slightly, but his voice steadier now. For the last 10 years, I've lived alone in this old house. Every morning I wake up and hear that clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Sometimes I go an entire day without speaking to a single soul because there's no one to talk to. I raised 2 children. I spent 40 years as an educator. And in the end, I didn't even have a person to talk to. Until I met you. He looked at Susan, his eyes reddening again, but not from anger. With you, I feel like a human being again. Not Principal Chun. Not Dad. Not a pension check. Just a regular old man who gets to talk with you, walk with you, have a warm meal with you. That's it. That's all. Susan lowered her head, her fingers knotting together. After a long moment, she said softly, Harold, there's something I haven't told you. My son, No need. Harold cut her off, his tone firm. Your son is your son. You are you. I don't need to know. Whatever he does, wherever he is, rich or poor, none of it matters to me. But Lisa's investigation. Let them investigate. Harold set his cup down. It made a soft clink on the glass tabletop. He looked out the window. It was fully dark now, the lights of the neighboring buildings flickering on one by one. Next Saturday, my birthday. If they come, we'll have a nice meal. If they don't. He didn't finish the sentence. The unspoken possibility hung in the air like a blade that hadn't yet fallen. Susan's phone buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID and silenced it. Telemarketer, she said, turning the phone face down on her knee. Harold thought nothing of it. Susan said she'd go finish dinner and stepped into the kitchen, closing the door. She leaned her back against it for a moment and pulled out her phone. The call she'd just ignored lit up the screen again. Michael. She declined it and opened her texts. Her son had sent several messages. Mom, we need your signature on the quarterly reports for the domestic branch. The city's cultural park project. They want to schedule a meeting with you this month. When are you coming back? She typed a brief reply. I'll deal with it next week. I'm busy right now. She put the phone away and turned on the faucet. The water rushed out, masking her soft sigh. Outside the kitchen window, night had fully descended. In the living room, Harold turned on the evening news but didn't watch. He stared at the family portrait on the wall, the one with his wife still in it, the kids small, all 4 of them squeezed into the frame, laughing. Back then, Andrew had a gap-toothed grin, and Lisa's hair was in pigtails, her cheek pressed against her mother's. The frame was a little dusty now, the glass covered in a thin film of neglect. Time moved so fast. In the blink of an eye, the 2 children in that photograph were middle-aged, and he had become their problem. The night before his birthday, Andrew called. Harold had just washed his feet and was getting ready for bed. The phone rang in the quiet bedroom. He answered. Andrew's tone was softer than last time, but it was a calculated softness, a strategic one. Dad, Lisa told me what happened. She was out of line, and I let her have it. She feels terrible, cried all night. But the core issue is still there. We're family. We need to talk this through rationally, not let outsiders make us a laughingstock. So here's the plan. Tomorrow, we'll come for your birthday. Lisa's family will come too. We'll have a nice meal together, and we won't bring up any of the unpleasantness. Susan, she can be there too. After all, she's looked after you for 6 months. We should thank her. Harold held the phone, silent for a moment. Just dinner, he asked. Just dinner. Family, sitting around the table, a warm meal together. We won't get into any of the heavy stuff. We can talk, clear the air. After hanging up, Harold leaned back against the headboard and set his phone on the nightstand. Beside it, Susan had already laid out his blood pressure medication and a glass of water, like she did every night. He thought for a moment, then picked up the phone and texted his son. Tomorrow, noon sharp. Bring Ethan and Emily. I want to see my grandkids. He sent the message, turned off the light, and lay down. In the darkness, he stared at the ceiling, the chandelier's outline barely visible. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow is the last chance. On his birthday, Harold was awake at 5:30. He dressed, went to the bathroom, and washed his face. The old man in the mirror had completely white hair, his wrinkles like a crumpled map. He shaved carefully, combed his hair, and put on a clean button-down shirt. Susan was already up before him, busy in the kitchen. She had her apron on. The steamer on the stove was puffing white steam, and the cutting board was loaded with prepped vegetables. She'd bought sea bass, ribs, shrimp, and his favorite, wood-ear mushrooms. Why are you up so early? Susan looked over her shoulder, spatula in hand. Go back to sleep. I can handle this. Couldn't sleep. Harold leaned against the kitchen doorframe, watching her work. She was so focused, occasionally wiping her hands on her apron before turning back to the pan. The scent of hot oil filled the kitchen. Outside the window, the sky was still a pale, pre-dawn gray. Something about this scene settled his heart completely. Susan. Thank you, he said. Not for the meal. For everything these past 6 months. For showing up when he was loneliest. For staying beside him when his own children turned their backs. For making him feel like life still had warmth in it. Susan turned and looked at him and smiled. There was understanding in it, and forgiveness, and a little bit of something complicated she couldn't quite say. Go wait in the living room. The kids will be here soon. Too much smoke in here. Go on. At 4 o'clock, Andrew's family arrived first. Ethan, 10, barreled through the door and threw his arms around Harold's neck. Grandpa, his chubby little hands clung tight. Harold scooped him up, the hard lines in his face finally softening. Ethan, you've gotten so big. Grandpa can barely lift you. Liar. Grandpa's the strongest. Ethan squirmed in his arms, giggling. Happy birthday, Dad. Andrew handed over a cake box, the ribbon neatly tied. His demeanor was far gentler than before. He even nodded toward the kitchen in Susan's direction. Grace, carrying a bag of fruit, smiled and said, Happy birthday, Dad, her eyes quickly scanning the room. They paused on the orchids on the balcony, then on the couple's photo on the TV stand, and finally settled on Susan's back in the kitchen. Susan was frying ribs, and the sizzling oil filled the whole house with a rich, savory scent. At 5:30, Lisa arrived with her husband and 7-year-old Emily. When she walked in, Susan was just coming out of the kitchen with a platter. The two women met face-to-face in the hallway, and the air tightened subtly. Lisa nodded. A simple nod. No Susan, no title at all, but it was the best attitude she'd shown in weeks. Emily, 3 years younger than Ethan, was shy and hid behind her mother, sneaking peeks at Susan. Susan bent down and offered her a piece of chocolate. Emily, you've gotten so big. Last time I saw you, you were only this tall. Emily looked up at her mom. Lisa gave a small nod, and the little girl took the chocolate. Thank you, ma'am, she whispered. Dinner was on the table. 8 dishes plus a soup, the whole surface covered. Steamed sea bass, sweet and sour pork, garlic shrimp, sautéed mushrooms, a tofu and crab casserole, braised pork meatballs, cucumber salad, and steamed broccoli with garlic. In the center was a huge bowl of steaming chicken soup. Susan had been at it all day. Every dish was Harold's favorite, and she'd also adjusted everything for the kids' palates. Andrew liked spice, so she'd made an extra chili oil dip. Lisa didn't like heavy food, so she'd steamed the fish light, with just a drizzle of soy sauce. Susan, this must have been so much work, Grace said, her tone carrying a deliberate, practiced politeness. Come, sit with us and eat. It was the tone of a host addressing a guest. Susan said nothing, just untied her apron and sat down. Harold seated her beside him. Under the table, he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Her hand was cool, and he felt the small Band-Aid on her finger, where she'd nicked herself chopping vegetables. The meal started calmly enough. Ethan clamored for cake and was silenced by a glare from Andrew. Emily ate her food quietly, her chopsticks still clumsy. A few grains of rice dropped on the table. She asked Lisa softly, Mommy, who's that lady? Lisa wiped her daughter's chin. She's Grandpa's friend, she said, voice carefully neutral. Halfway through dinner, Andrew raised his glass. He brought a bottle of red wine and poured a little for everyone. Susan didn't drink, so Harold poured her some tea. Dad, happy birthday. To your health. May you live a long, long life. Everyone raised their glasses. The rims clinked together, a clear, crisp sound. Harold took a sip of tea and set his glass down. He knew. The real conversation was about to start. Sure enough, Andrew set down his wine glass and cleared his throat. Dad, since we're all here, let's talk about what comes next. His tone was exceedingly reasonable, as if he'd rehearsed it. You're in your 70s. You're in good shape now, but eventually you're going to need more care. Lisa and I have talked. Starting this year, you can rotate between our houses, 6 months with me, 6 months with her. That way we can look after you, and you won't be stuck in this big, quiet house all alone. Plus, Ethan and Emily would get to spend more time with you. Harold's chopsticks stopped moving. He had been in the middle of placing a piece of fish on Susan's plate. He set the chopsticks down. And what about this house? He asked. We could rent it out, Andrew said smoothly. This was clearly a plan he'd spent a lot of time on. The rental income will manage for you. Put it in a retirement account. In this neighborhood, you could probably get around $1,500 a month. We'll handle the property taxes, utilities, maintenance. You won't have to worry about a thing. Just relax and enjoy life. Lisa picked up the thread, her voice much softer than the last time she'd been here. Exactly, Dad. Living alone in this big house, you're just wearing yourself out cleaning it. Last time I was here, I saw mildew in the bathroom. At our places, you'd have a housekeeper, meals cooked, kids around. I just moved into a bigger place. I saved a room for you on the south side, great natural light. Harold glanced at Susan. She was looking down at her plate, her chopsticks quietly picking at a few grains of rice, her expression unreadable. But he noticed her hand had slowed. And what about Susan? Harold asked. A brief silence fell over the table. Andrew and Grace exchanged a glance. Andrew put down his glass and used the careful tone of someone navigating a minefield. Well, naturally, Susan would go back to her own place. She has her own child. She should live with him. We're not related to her, after all. She can't just stay here forever. I'm marrying her, Harold said. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone at the table heard it with perfect clarity. The table went dead silent. Ethan, oblivious to the sudden shift in atmosphere, piped up with a mouth full of ribs. Grandpa's getting married? To this lady? Can I be the ring bearer? Lily in my class was a flower girl when her uncle got married. Eat your dinner, Andrew snapped, his voice 10 times harsher than a moment before. Ethan flinched, his little face crumpling in confusion. Emily looked around at all the grown-ups, her spoon suspended in midair. Lisa set her chopsticks down. The ivory clicked against the porcelain bowl. She took a deep breath, as if suppressing a volcano. Dad, do you really have to do this? Turn our entire family upside down over this. I'm finding a companion. What's the crime? Harold's voice rose, his wrinkles deepening. It's legal. It's moral. Your mother, on her deathbed, told me to. What right do you have to stop me? Just because I'm your father, you think you can control the rest of my life? Because we're your children. Lisa stood up, her voice finally cracking. Because we're the ones who'll be responsible for you. Dad, think. Right now you're infatuated. You think she's perfect. But once you're married and she's gotten her hands on the house and the money, what's to stop her from kicking you to the curb? I've read dozens of stories online. Every single one of those scammed seniors thought the other person was wonderful at first. Susan looked up at Lisa, her voice still perfectly gentle. Lisa, I would never do that. I'll sign any agreement you want. We can have it notarized. I don't want anything. You shut up. Lisa pointed at her, her finger trembling. This is a family matter. Nobody asked you. Who even are you? You're just some stranger who's known him for 6 months. The bang of Harold's hand on the table rattled every dish. Chopsticks jumped and clattered. Ethan burst into tears, and Grace quickly pulled him onto her lap. Let her speak. Harold roared, his voice cracking. Let Susan speak. She's not a stranger. In the last 6 months, she's been more family to me than you have. Speak about what? About how she sweet-talks you. About her wonderful cooking and her calligraphy, and how none of that means she isn't after your money. Lisa was crying now, but it was a furious, shouting kind of crying. Dad, I checked her out. Her son is overseas. Nobody knows what he actually does, probably unemployed. Her own little condo still has a mortgage on it. The bank has a lien. With her background, what does she want with you? Your good looks? The fact that you're 73? Grace tried to intervene. Lisa, please calm down. It's Dad's birthday. How am I supposed to calm down? Lisa wiped at her eyes, but new tears immediately took their place. Mom's only been gone 10 years, and he's already racing to replace her. And how did he treat Mom when she was alive? When she was hospitalized for months, he was too busy chasing some school accreditation to be there. We were the ones at her bedside. And now he treats a stranger better than he ever treated us. Susan, this isn't personal, but I just don't get it. If you want to find someone, the world is full of men. Why does it have to be my father? Andrew stood up too, his voice calmer than his sister's, but it was a brittle calm, with a deeper fury simmering underneath. Dad, let's put it all on the table. You can be with her. But 3 conditions. 1. No marriage license. Live however you want, but not in the eyes of the law. 2. We put all your assets into an irrevocable trust. The house, savings, pension, locked down for Lisa and me. 3. She can't live here permanently. You want to see each other, go out somewhere. Agree to these 3 things, and we're still your children. We'll come for the holidays, do what we're supposed to do. Refuse. Refuse in what? Harold stared at his son, his gaze eerily calm, the dead calm before a hurricane. Andrew was silent for a few seconds. They stretched on for an eternity. Then he spoke, his voice low, each word carved from stone. Then we have no father. Don't expect us when you're sick and dying. Don't wait for us on the holidays. We'll even let you keep the house and the money, since it's all going to an outsider anyway. The words were absolute. There was no turning back. The chicken soup in the middle of the table still steamed, a wisp of vapor curling upward and vanishing under the light. The steamed sea base lay there intact, its delicate bed of scallions and ginger still glistening, but no one was looking at it. Ethan had stopped crying, huddled into his mother's side, staring wide-eyed at the adults. Emily buried her face in Lisa's lap, whimpering, but Lisa ignored her. Harold looked around the table. His son, his daughter, his daughter-in-law, his son-in-law, his grandson, his granddaughter. 6 faces, 6 pairs of eyes, all fixed on him, waiting. He let his gaze travel from one to the next. Andrew's expression was a wall. Lisa's eyes were red, but behind the tears was mostly fury. Grace stared at her lap, unable to meet his eyes. Lisa's husband, who'd been silent the whole time, was awkwardly studying the ceiling. The 2 little ones, too young to understand, were just scared. Suddenly, he felt exhausted. A bone-deep weariness, not physical. It was like a light inside him had simply been switched off. He'd been a principal for 40 years. He'd solved thousands of impossible problems. But this one was harder than all of them combined. He'd once believed that raising his kids, putting them through college, seeing them married and settled, that was his life's great task, and once it was done, he could rest. Now he knew the truth. Raising them was just the beginning. Being understood by them was the end. And between him and his children, an entire ocean now stretched. Susan stood up. She picked up her bowl and chopsticks with quiet, careful movements, as if afraid of disturbing something. She took them to the kitchen sink. Then she came back, folded her apron neatly on the back of her chair, and picked up her jacket from the coat rack. Her movements were utterly composed, like someone who knew it was time to leave. "Harold," she said, and her voice was still so gentle. "I'm going to head home. You and the kids need some time alone." She didn't look him in the eye. She was afraid that if she did, the tears would come. "Sit down," Harold said, and he clamped his hand over her wrist. His grip was strong, stronger than you'd expect from a man of 73. He stood up, back ramrod straight, a posture ingrained by decades at the podium. He looked at Andrew, then at Lisa. He looked for a long, long time. Outside, the sky had darkened, and the living room light carved his face into halves of light and shadow. Then he said a single word. "Get out." Andrew froze, as if he hadn't heard right. "Dad, take your things. Take your kids. And get out," Harold said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "As of today, I have no children. You don't want me? Then I don't want you." Lisa shrieked, her voice tearing through the evening silence. "Dad, you've lost your mind. You're throwing away your own flesh and blood for some woman you met 6 months ago." "She's not some woman," Harold said, each word clipped and final. "You are. Andrew's face went crimson. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair so violently he nearly tipped it over. He yanked his confused son by the arm. "Ethan, we're leaving. There's no grandpa here anymore." Ethan was dragged toward the door, twisting back, wailing, "Grandpa." The sound was sharp and bright, a knife slicing through the room. Harold felt it pierce him, but he didn't move. Lisa snatched up her daughter, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't zip up Emily's coat. Emily's scarf fell to the floor. Lisa scooped it up, her voice trembling with rage. "Fine, go live with her. But don't you dare come crying to us later. When you're lying in a bed unable to move, then you'll know who really cared about you." The family stormed out. Ethan's cries echoed in the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely. The cake still sat on the table, its ribbons still neatly tied. No one had even opened it. The food was cold. A thin film of oil had congealed over the chicken soup. The eyes of the steamed fish had gone cloudy. Susan began clearing the table, stacking the plates, gathering the chopsticks. Her movements were quiet, barely making a sound. But Harold saw her hands trembling, the plates clinking together softly. He walked over and covered her hands with his own. "Leave it. Come sit. I need to do it. Otherwise we'll get bugs," Susan said, her voice hoarse. She didn't look up, just kept carrying plates into the kitchen. As she passed through the doorway, her shoulders gave a single, tiny shake. But she steadied herself, turned on the faucet, and let the sound of the water drown everything out. Harold sat back down and stared at the ruins of the feast. His eyes drifted to the family portrait on the wall, the four of them, laughing like life would never have a cloudy day. Then he suddenly laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not an angry one, just an empty, hollow laugh, the laugh of a man who sees everything clearly now. "I was an educator for 40 years. I taught thousands of students about respect, gratitude, integrity. And what did I raise?" He shook his head, as if evaluating a matter that no longer concerned him. Susan said nothing, just kept cleaning up. When she reached Lisa's seat, she found a small wallet on the chair. Gray leather, with a tiny Disney charm on the zipper. It must have slipped out of her purse during the fight. Susan hesitated, then opened it. A couple of credit cards, some cash, and a photo. The photo was of a little girl, 5 or 6 years old, in pigtails, riding on the shoulders of a young man, grinning wide, a missing front tooth showing. The young man was Harold. 30 years ago. Susan closed the wallet and set it on the table in front of Harold. Harold picked it up and looked at that photo. It was faded, the edges curled. He'd had black hair then, giving his daughter a shoulder ride to see the fireworks over the lake. His wife had been off to the side, scolding him to be careful. He stared at the photo for so long that Susan thought he might never speak again. Then he gently set the wallet down. "Susan," he said, "tomorrow, we go to the courthouse." The bowl in Susan's hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Porcelain shards skittered across the tile, catching the light. She knelt to pick them up, and a piece sliced her finger. Blood welled up. She didn't make a sound. Harold knelt down and took her hand. "Leave it. I'll buy a new bowl tomorrow. We'll buy a pair." They didn't make it to the courthouse the next day. In the middle of the night, Harold got up to use the bathroom, and suddenly the room spun violently. He grabbed the wall to keep from falling. Susan woke with a start, saw his face chalk white and dripping sweat, and called 911. The ambulance tore through the empty streets and rushed him to the nearest hospital. The doctor said it was a hypertensive crisis, his blood pressure spiking dangerously. They'd gotten him there just in time. A little longer, and it could have been a stroke. Has the patient been under significant emotional stress recently? Intense emotional swings can be extremely dangerous at his age, the doctor said, writing out a prescription. He'll need to stay for observation for a few days until his blood pressure stabilizes. And going forward, a low-sodium diet. No extreme emotional highs or lows. In the hospital room, Harold lay hooked up to N4, the clear fluid dripping steadily. Susan sat at his bedside, having stayed awake all night, dark circles pooling under her eyes. She was peeling an apple, the knife gliding smoothly around the fruit in one long, unbroken ribbon. "I scared you," Harold said, his voice weak. "This is my fault," Susan murmured, not looking at him. "I shouldn't have let you get so upset. Tell me off. It'll make me feel better. This has nothing to do with you. They've wanted to do this for a long time." Harold closed his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. When I finally couldn't get around anymore, the plan was to take the house and the savings, stick me in a home, and call it good. Then you showed up and ruined their plan. You made them think the prize was about to slip away. The apple peel broke. Susan started again, the soft scrape of the blade the only sound in the quiet room. She cut the apple into tiny pieces in a bowl and lifted a piece to his mouth, blowing on it gently first. A nurse came in to check his vitals, saw Susan cutting the apple into fingernail-sized slivers and feeding them to Harold one by one, and paused for a second. "Family member needs to go pay the admission deposit," she said, handing over the slip. "Of course." Susan stood up and reached for her purse. The man in the next bed was an old fellow in his 80s named Mr. Walker, whose wife had passed years ago and whose kids lived in another state and rarely visited. He watched Susan walk out, then said to Harold, "That your wife? She takes good care of you." "Yeah," Harold said, still looking at the door. "You're a lucky man," Mr. Walker sighed, lacing his hands behind his head. "I've been here 3 days. My kids came once, stayed 20 minutes, said work was busy. Nothing beats a good wife. Shame I don't have one anymore." Harold didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. The apple Susan had given him was very sweet. When Susan came back, she had a bowl of hot oatmeal from the cafeteria. She propped him up, tucked a pillow behind his back, and spoon-fed him carefully, testing the temperature of every spoonful against her lip. Harold watched her. 65 years old, her crow's feet like fine river deltas, but her eyes were so bright, bright like winter stars. She always wore muted colors, spoke slowly, moved steadily. Over 6 months, she'd memorized every single one of his habits. His tea had to be weak, or he wouldn't sleep. He needed a night light. Total darkness made him uneasy. Every morning at 7, he had to listen to the news on the radio, and missing it would throw off his whole day. His own children didn't know a single one of these things. "Susan," Harold suddenly asked, "is your son really abroad?" Susan's hand hesitated on the spoon for just a fraction of a second. She scooped up another spoonful. "Yes, he runs a business. Travels all the time. Barely spends a few weeks in the country each year." She lifted the spoon to his mouth, her hand perfectly steady. "What kind of business?" "A little bit of everything." Susan set down the bowl and wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin. "Harold, when you get out of the hospital, I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" "My son's company, here in the States. He's always wanted to meet you. I've told him all about you." Harold blinked. "He has a company here? You told me he was overseas." "He recently came back. Opened a branch office in the city." Susan set the napkin down and looked at him. "To be honest, my son's name is Michael Zhou. You might have heard the name." Harold thought for a moment, then shook his head. Since retiring, he didn't follow business news much. "No." "What's his line of work?" "A few different industries. Real estate, cultural development, investments. The scope is pretty broad." Susan's tone was utterly flat, like she was discussing the price of cabbage at the grocery store. "He's just a regular businessman." But Harold sensed something was off. He'd spent a lifetime reading people. When Susan said regular businessman, her eyes flickered, not with guilt, but like she was holding something back, not wanting to dump it all at once. He didn't press. She'd said she'd tell him when he got out. That was fine. He trusted her. That trust had been built brick by brick over the past 6 months, and it could weather anything. On the 3rd day in the hospital, Andrew showed up. He didn't come into the room. Susan saw him when she stepped out to get hot water. He was standing near the nurse's station, holding a bag of fruit, looking like he was wrestling with whether to go in. When he saw Susan, he walked over. They sat down together on a bench in the hallway, a careful distance between them. "Susan, how's my dad?" Andrew's voice had lost its aggressive edge from the dinner. Now it was just tired and controlled. "Blood pressure is stable. The doctor says he can go home in another day or 2, but he needs rest," Susan said, setting the pitcher of water at her feet. Andrew was silent for a moment. The hallway was busy, someone on the phone, a wheelchair rolling by, the soft ding of the nurse's call bell. When he spoke, his voice was very low. "What we said that night, it was over the line. Lisa went home and cried half the night. She dug out a photo album, old pictures of her and Dad. But you know her. She can't back down. Even when her heart's hurting, her mouth won't stop. I know. You're not bad people. You're just worried about your father. Susan, you have to understand us." Andrew set the bag of fruit on the bench and clasped his hands together so tightly his knuckles went white. My dad's old. He's an easy target. This isn't personal. Honestly, anyone in your position, we'd be just as suspicious. If you really care about him, talk some sense into him. Don't let him tear our family apart. We are his flesh and blood. You can cut a limb off, but the bone's still connected. Susan looked at him. In profile, Andrew looked so much like his father, the same jawline, the same slightly prominent cheekbones. Just 30 years younger. Andrew, do you think your father is unhappy with me? Happy. Andrew looked taken aback, then let out a short laugh. Not sarcasm, more like he'd heard a word that didn't quite fit. Susan, at your age, what's happiness got to do with it? It's about having a companion. Someone to eat with, walk with, keep an eye on each other. But you've got to be practical. Your pension's $1,200 a month. His is over $4,000. Combined, that's $5,200. What's that going to get you these days? One major medical event, and it's gone. Who do you think will be footing the bill? Us. You don't need to worry about the money, Susan said, her voice still mild. Easy for you to say. Andrew's tone chilled again, but he pulled it back quickly. He took a deep breath, visibly straining for control. Anyway, I'll put it plainly. You want to get married? Fine. But every asset in Dad's name, house, savings, investments, has to be transferred to me and Lisa irrevocably. That's the bottom line. Everything else, we can talk about. Susan looked at him for a long time. The fluorescent lights of the hallway cast a pallid glow on her face, and the lines at the corners of her eyes seemed especially deep. She suddenly realized that this middle-aged man and his furious father were exactly alike. Two islands, separated not by hatred but by 10 years of accumulated silence and misunderstanding. And neither one would swim over first. I understand. Go on in and see your father. He's awake, Susan said, standing up and lifting the pitcher. I'll go get him some tea. Andrew hesitated, then stood, straightened his collar, and pushed open the door to the room. Harold was sitting up in bed reading the newspaper. When he saw his son, he folded the paper, set it on the nightstand, and took off his reading glasses. Andrew sat down beside the bed, placed the fruit on the table. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, pigeons fluttered by, their wings beating against the glass. Dad, Andrew broke the silence, his voice hoarse, like he hadn't slept. The other night, I was out of line. I'm sorry, but you have to see it from our side. It's not about the money. I have my own business. I'm doing fine. I'm afraid you're going to get conned. Mom died when I was 35. All these years watching you alone, it ate at me. But if you marry someone and she takes the house, how am I supposed to face Mom's memory? Harold closed his eyes, as if he'd drifted off. He stayed that way for so long Andrew thought he really wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke. Are you finished? Dad. Then go, Harold said. He opened his eyes, but didn't look at his son. He stared out the window at the gray-white sky and the distant high-rises blurred by haze. I'm tired. Let me rest. Andrew stood up, nudged the bag of fruit further onto the table. I'll come back tomorrow. Rest well. Don't overthink things. He walked to the door and looked back. Harold was still staring out the window, motionless as a statue. The four dripped steadily. Drip, 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 just like the old pendulum clock at home. Andrew left. His footsteps faded down the hallway, swallowed by the elevator doors. Harold opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. Hospital ceilings were so white, blindingly white. His wife had died under a ceiling just like this one. He'd sat beside her, holding her hand, his kids crying behind him. Andrew had said, Dad, I'll take care of you. Give me the chance. Lisa had said, Dad, you've still got us. We'll never leave you. He'd believed them. Now he knew they hadn't lied. They'd just forgotten. Susan came back in, holding a hot water bottle. The weather had turned cold. She tucked it under the blanket at his feet. Harold, are your feet cold? The nurse said a hot water bottle is safer than an electric blanket. The warmth crept up from his feet, comforting. Harold suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of peace, not from any promise or guarantee, but from the simple fact that, right now, someone remembered that his feet got cold. Susan, he said, tell me the truth. What does your son actually do? I'm not investigating you. I just want to know. Susan adjusted the hot water bottle and tucked the blankets in around him. Then she sat down and took his hand. Her palm was warm. The back of her hand had fine lines, and on her ring finger was a simple gold band she'd worn for years. She looked at him, her gaze deep and sincere. "Harold, when you get out of here, I'll tell you everything. All of it. What he does, what my situation is, why I haven't mentioned it before. I'll tell you all of it." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "For now, just rest. Don't think too hard. Doctor's orders. No emotional upheavals." Harold looked into her eyes. There was so much there. Tenderness, resolve, gratitude, and something complicated, tucked deep, that he couldn't quite decipher. He realized he'd probably never really known the full story of this woman. But he wasn't afraid. He'd lived 73 years. Patience was the one thing he had in abundance. "Okay," he said. "I'll wait." The day he was discharged was a bright, sunny day. The winter sun was warm on his shoulders, and the air smelled faintly of early blossoms. The forsythia bushes by the hospital entrance were already bursting with yellow. Susan handled all the discharge paperwork and sorted his medications into a pill organizer. Blood pressure pill twice a day, the diuretic in the morning, the aspirin before meals. Each compartment labeled neatly. She did it all with a natural ease, as if she'd been doing it for years. They took a cab home. The familiar streets rolled past the window. The diner where they always got breakfast, the community center where they'd met, the turn for Lincoln High. When they pulled up to his building, Susan helped him out. He walked slowly up the stairs, pausing on every landing to catch his breath, and she waited beside him each time, patient as a tree. On the third-floor landing, Harold stopped. There was a man standing outside his door, mid-40s, wearing a perfectly tailored dark blue suit and silver-rimmed glasses, with a polished, thoughtful presence. He was holding a sleek gift bag and standing very straight, like he was waiting for someone important. When he saw Susan, the corner of his mouth lifted, and he walked quickly toward them. "Mom," he said, his voice low and warm. Susan smiled and nodded, then turned to Harold. "Harold, this is my son, Michael." "Michael, this is Harold." Michael Joe stepped forward, inclined his head slightly, and extended both hands in greeting. "Mr. Chun, my mother talks about you constantly. She says you were the principal of Lincoln High and that you're an accomplished calligrapher. Yin style, I believe. I've practiced a bit myself over the years. I've been hoping for a chance to learn from you." His handshake was firm but measured, his jacket cuff discreetly monogrammed. The man carried an air of quiet authority, the kind earned not through bluster, but through years of high-stakes decisions. Come in. Come in." Susan opened the door and ushered everyone inside. "Michael, why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "I haven't prepared a thing. I heard Mr. Chun had been in the hospital. My morning opened up, so I thought I'd stop by." Michael set the gift bag on the coffee table and sat down on the sofa. His posture was perfect, but relaxed. "Just a small gift. How are you feeling, Mr. Chun?" "Much better. Just a blood pressure issue." "Old man's trouble," Harold said, settling into the armchair across from him and studying the younger man. He noticed that when Michael listened, he looked you directly in the eye, not in a confrontational way, but with genuine interest. That kind of polish couldn't be faked. "So, what line of work are you in, Michael?" "I run a small business." Michael smiled, accepting a cup of tea from his mother with both hands and a quiet thank you. "A little bit of everything, really. Mostly real estate and cultural projects these days." "Mr. Chun, actually, I came here today to discuss something with you and my mother." Susan sat down beside Harold, hands folded in her lap. "What's all this formality about?" Michael set his teacup down and interlaced his fingers on his knee. He looked at the two of them with open sincerity. "Mom, Mr. Chun, I'll be direct. I know about the situation with Mr. Chin's children. Their primary concern is financial. They're worried my mother might be after Mr. Chin's assets. I understand that worry. It happens." Harold started to protest, but Michael raised a hand, asking him to hear him out. "Mr. Chun, here's what I propose. Before you two get married, we draw up a legal agreement. All your current assets, this house, your savings, your pension, get legally designated to your children. That should eliminate their objection. It proves my mother isn't after a single thing you own. As for my mother, her retirement, and any future medical care are entirely my responsibility. You won't have to spend a dollar. In fact, I'd like to cover all the day-to-day living expenses for both of you going forward." "Absolutely not." Harold set his cup down sharply. "Michael, I appreciate the gesture, but this is my business. My pension is more than enough. I won't have you paying my way. Please, Mr. Chun, let me finish. Michael leaned forward, his voice gentler still. This isn't a burden. It's my duty. My father died when I was young. My mother raised me alone. When I was a kid, to pay for my school supplies, she'd work her job at the cultural office all day and then go sell handmade greeting cards on the street at night. Her hands would swell up like dough in the winter, and she never took a day off. Now that I have the means, all I want is for her to be happy. And she's happy with you. That's all that matters. The money is nothing. He paused and looked Harold in the eye. And this isn't just about money. By legally designating your assets to your children, you're giving them the reassurance they've demanded. You're removing their entire argument. If they still kick up a fuss after that, then it was never about the money. And at that point, you'll have seen their true colors. Susan tried to interrupt. Michael, don't. Mom, let me handle this. Michael's tone was tender but unyielding. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, offering it to Harold with both hands. It was the most formal gesture in business. Mr. Chun, this is my contact. Anything you need, anytime. My phone is always on. Harold took the card. It was elegantly simple, black text on white cardstock. No flashy designs. It read, Michael Zhou. Below that, in smaller letters, Chairman, Zenith Group. Harold's hand froze. Zenith Group. He knew that name. It was one of the largest private conglomerates in the city. Real estate, cultural investments, educational philanthropy. They owned half a dozen downtown high-rises and shopping centers. Just last year, Zenith had donated $2 million to build a new library at Lincoln High, his old school. The school had sent him an invitation to the ribbon cutting as the former principal, but his blood pressure had been acting up that day and he hadn't made it. He'd watched the ceremony on the local news. The young entrepreneur on the screen, the one who'd bowed slightly and cut the red ribbon, was the same man now sitting in his living room, calmly sipping tea and calling him Mr. Chun. Harold turned to Susan. Susan had her head down, her fingers knotting together like a schoolgirl caught in a mistake. You're Michael Zhou. Harold flipped the card over and back again. Chairman of Zenith Group? The Zenith Group that donated a library to my school. Lincoln High is my alma mater, Michael said, his expression utterly genuine. No arrogance, no presumption, just a simple statement of fact. My mother told me you were the principal there. I've wanted to meet you for a long time. Then why didn't you say something sooner? Harold's voice rose, more from disbelief than anger. Say what? Susan gave a rueful laugh, finally lifting her head, the corners of her eyes glistening. That my son is a CEO? That money isn't an issue. Harold, I'm with you because of who you are. Because you tell me my brushstrokes have strength. Because you always say my cooking is wonderful, even when I've ruined a dish. Because when we walk, you always guide me to the inside of the sidewalk. Not because of your name or your bank account. I'm with you because being with you makes me feel at home. Michael picked up the thread, his voice gentle with the effort of explanation. Mr. Chun, my mother's been this way for years. I've tried to buy her a big house, hire a live-in cook, a driver. She refuses all of it. She says she's used to a simple life, that big houses make her anxious. That little condo is the one my dad left her. She says it has memories. Her pension really is just that small amount. She stands in line at the bank every month to deposit it. She's never once asked me for a cent. The clothes she wears, the things she uses, she bought all of it herself. He paused, took a sip of tea, and then said, So, Mr. Chun, I came here today not just to propose the legal agreement. I came to show you, with absolute certainty, that my mother wants nothing from you except what you've already given her. The living room was silent. Sparrows chirped outside the window. From somewhere downstairs came the distant jingle of an ice cream truck. The faint scent of jasmine from Susan's morning tea still hung in the air. Harold held the business card, looking at it, then at Susan, then back at Michael. And then, suddenly, he laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a mocking laugh, but the laugh of a man who'd just had a massive weight lifted off his chest and found the whole thing slightly ridiculous. Susan. He pointed a finger at her, waggling it. You kept this from me. 6 whole months. Not a single word. And here I was, feeling guilty that you had to take the bus everywhere, thinking I'd use my next pension check to buy you an electric scooter so you wouldn't be cold in the winter. Susan's eyes welled up immediately, and she grabbed a tissue. I was afraid you'd feel pressured. Remember when you asked about my pension and I told you the truth? You said, that's fine. as long as the person is good. After that, I couldn't possibly bring up Michael. I was so scared you'd think we were from different worlds. Different worlds? Harold set the card on the table and took Susan's hand. The hand with the fine wrinkles, with the little nick from this morning's cooking, with the simple gold band she'd worn for decades. Susan, listen to me. I don't care who you are. I don't care who your son is. All I know is that for the past 6 months, you're the one who's made my breakfast every morning. You're the one who remembers every single one of my pills. You're the one who stood behind me without a word when my own children were screaming in my face. You are you. And you are the woman I'm going to marry. Michael watched quietly from the sofa. He watched his mother's trembling shoulders, watched Harold's firm grip on her hand, watched these two white-haired people leaning into each other like a pair of old trees in the afternoon sun. His own eyes grew a little hot. He cleared his throat and stood up. Mom, Mr. Chun, I have a meeting back at the office. I should head out. He took his car keys from his pocket and then, bending down, slid his business card a little closer to Harold on the coffee table. Think about what I said. I'll have our lawyers draft the paperwork for the agreement. Whatever you decide, I support you both completely. Mr. Chun, I'm leaving my mother in your care. He gave a slight bow, turned toward the door, and as he was putting on his shoes, he looked back at Susan. Mom, this weekend I'll have the kitchen make some soup. Bring Mr. Chun over for dinner. Then he pulled the door shut, and his footsteps faded down the stairs. The two of them were alone again. Harold picked up the business card, slipped it into his shirt pocket, and gave it a pat. Chairman of Zenith Group. Well, I'll be. From now on, when I'm out walking with old Mr. Patterson, I can brag that my partner's son is a tycoon. Susan burst out laughing, then immediately started wiping away tears. When did you become such a joker? I learned from you. Harold stood up and walked to the window. Down below, the sleek black sedan was just pulling out of the complex gate, its roof glinting in the afternoon sun. He thought about that title on the business card, and then he thought about Susan, elbowing through the morning crowds at the market to save a few cents. The two images overlapped, contradictory, yet utterly harmonious. Because she was Susan. No matter who her son was, she would always be the woman who haggled over vegetables, who sat quietly beside him while he practiced calligraphy, who stayed up all night beside his hospital bed. He cracked the window open and took a deep breath. Down in the courtyard, someone was walking a dog. Someone else was pushing a stroller. The world spun on as usual, but his world was not the same. Susan, he said, turning around, his face silhouetted against the light with an expression he hadn't worn in a long time. Resolution, certainty, a man who'd finally found his north. About that agreement. I don't agree with all of it. Susan set down the dish towel, looking at him with sudden anxiety. My assets, the house, the savings, they can all go to the kids and the legal paperwork. That's fine. I don't need much. But there's one thing I won't give up. He walked back and sat down beside her. The notary can carve out whatever they want for my children. But what I'm giving you isn't the house. It's me. Every day I'm alive, I'm here with you. Susan's lips moved, but no sound came. Your son is a tycoon. You don't need a thing. But I want him to know his mother won't be shortchanged with me. Harold held her hand tightly. I'm adding a clause to that agreement. As long as I'm alive, this house is your home. No one can ever push you out. That's my line in the sand. Susan bowed her head, and the tears finally spilled over. This time she didn't hide. She didn't pretend to go to the kitchen. She just sat there, letting the tears roll down her cheeks and drop onto their clasped hands. Outside, the sun was bright on the pots of orchids she'd planted on the balcony, the soil giving off a damp, earthy scent. A blue jay landed on the railing, cocked its head to peer inside, and then flew off. Harold, she finally said, her voice very small. Next weekend. Let's invite them all here. Your children, my son. We'll have a meal together. She squeezed his hand. Before, we each had our own separate families. But now, she couldn't finish. Now we're one family, Harold finished for her. The words settled softly into the quiet room, like a seed landing in fertile soil. 3 days later, Harold sent the same text to both Andrew and Lisa. He didn't write much. Just one line. Sunday noon. Come home. One last talk. If you still see me as your father, you'll be here. If not, don't bother ever coming again. After sending it, he set the phone on the coffee table and said to Susan in the kitchen, keep the food simple. Simple is better. They aren't coming for the food anyway, Susan said, tying her apron. A pot of oatmeal was bubbling on the stove. Sunday morning, Susan was up early. She didn't make a feast. Just a pot of oatmeal, some scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and toast. It was as simple as their everyday breakfast. She knew the meal wasn't the point today. At 11:30, the doorbell rang. Harold opened the door. Andrew's family arrived first. Ethan barreled in with a backpack, shouting, "Grandpa!" Whatever trauma he'd absorbed last time seemed to have been forgotten. He immediately started digging through Harold's snack cabinet. Andrew and Grace stood at the door, visibly more subdued than before, carrying a fruit basket and pastries. Andrew said, "Hey, Dad," his voice a little dry, and glanced inside. He didn't see Susan. "Is Susan here?" Grace asked, her tone much more genuine than her previous hostess performance. "In the kitchen. Have a seat." Harold gestured to the living room. Grace set down the fruit and hesitated, then walked toward the kitchen. "Susan, let me help." "You go sit down. I'll bring things out." There was an eager politeness in her voice, but it was proactive this time. Susan blinked in surprise, handing her a bowl of fresh berries. "Oh, no need. It's just a few things." "Grace, go relax. It's almost ready." "I don't mind. I do it at home all the time." Grace carried the bowl out, then glanced back at Susan's silhouette in the kitchen. The slim back in an apron, hair neatly combed, dropping a handful of walnuts into the oatmeal. She was suddenly reminded of her own mother in the kitchen, and a strange, aching knot formed in her chest. Lisa arrived last, hustling in at 12:15. Her eyes were a little swollen, like she hadn't slept well, and her face looked drawn. She called out, "Dad," first when she entered, then glanced toward the kitchen. Susan was just coming out with a steaming pot of coffee. The two met face to face in the hallway. The air tightened for a single beat. Lisa's lips parted, like something was stuck in her throat. Then she looked down and said, very quietly, "Susan." Just her name. No title. But it was the very first time she'd initiated a greeting. Susan smiled, set the coffee on the table, and wiped her hands. "Lisa, come in. Everything's ready. I remembered you like berries, so I got extra." Lisa's eyes instantly went red. She ducked her head, pretending to fiddle with her shoelaces, and stayed crouched for a long time. When she stood up, she had composed herself. The meal was much quieter than the last one. The oatmeal steamed in its pot, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the room. Ethan scribbled in a coloring book on the floor while Emily sat beside Lisa, quietly eating her toast. Andrew stirred his oatmeal for a long time without taking a bite. Lisa's gaze kept flicking between Susan and her father, as if she wanted to say something but kept swallowing it back down. Harold scanned the faces around the table and set down his spoon. The soft clink made everyone look up. "I asked you here today to tell you something officially," Harold said. His voice was as steady as when he used to announce a new school policy. "Susan and I are getting married. We're signing the papers next month." Lisa's fingers tightened around her spoon, but she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Andrew looked up at his father, then at Susan. He opened his mouth and managed only a single syllable. "Dad, let me finish." Harold raised a hand. "Before that happens, I'm meeting with an estate lawyer. The house, the savings, every asset in my name. It's all getting legally designated to you and Lisa. Susan gets not a single cent." Grace's spoon stopped in midair, and she looked at her husband in shock. Andrew froze, completely thrown. He'd prepared every argument, every warning about asset protection, about scams, about doing this for your own good. In an instant, all of them evaporated. "The thing you were so afraid of won't happen," Harold continued, his voice even. "And for the record, Susan's son is Michael Zhou, the chairman of Zenith Group. I don't need his money. But you should know, your stepmother isn't with me for my $500,000 house. Her son could buy a dozen of them without blinking." A silence fell over the room. Andrew's pupils dilated slightly. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and then his face changed. Zenith Group. The Zenith Group that had donated a library to his father's school. He remembered a financial news headline from last month. Zenith Group acquired a downtown commercial plot for over $40 million. His throat bobbed. Lisa was stunned into silence, too. She remembered her notebook, her meticulous little investigation. Pension, $1,200 a month. Small condo. Mortgage. Son overseas. Occupation unknown. She'd thought that data was the whole truth. She hadn't realized the truth was an iceberg, and she'd only seen the tip. She looked at Susan, who was sitting quietly beside her father, holding a cup of coffee, looking exactly as she always had. No smugness. No, I told you so. Just a quiet 65-year-old woman. Harold stood up, retrieved an envelope from the drawer, and set it on the table. This is the appointment confirmation with the lawyer. Next week, we're signing the papers. After that, you can call me Dad if you want, or keep freezing me out. But I'm going to live my own life. Andrew stared at the bowl of oatmeal in front of him, now gone cold, a skin forming on the surface. He broke it with his spoon. Then he set the spoon down, picked up the appointment slip, and looked at the date. His voice was lower than it had ever been. Dad, that's not what I meant. I never wanted your house. I was just forget it. He stood up and walked over to Susan. Everyone watched him. Grace gave his sleeve a tiny tug from behind. He ignored it. He stood there, this 45-year-old man, slightly taller than Susan, suddenly looking completely at a loss. Susan, he said, his voice rough. The way we acted before, it was wrong. We shouldn't have dug into your past. We shouldn't have said those horrible things. He paused, his Adam's apple bobbing. I'm sorry. Susan stood up and gave his sleeve a gentle tug. Andrew, the past is the past. You're your father's children. That makes you my children now. Families don't hold grudges. Lisa, still sitting at the table, finally broke. Not tears of anger or self-pity, but of shame. She remembered slamming her notebook onto the coffee table, remembered screaming, "Nobody asked you." Remembered Susan taking every single blow without a word in self-defense. She stood up and walked over, her head bowed, her voice barely scraping past her teeth. Susan, what I said that day, it was cruel. I wasn't. I was just. Hush. Susan patted the back of her hand. Lisa, you're a good daughter. You were trying to protect your father. That means you love him. You just went about it the wrong way. We have time. I understand. Lisa couldn't hold back anymore. She threw her arms around Susan and buried her face in her shoulder. Susan gently patted her back, the way you'd soothe a crying child. Grace stood off to the side, wiping her own eyes. Ethan, oblivious to the shift, ran up holding a drawing he'd just finished, a stick-figure old man and an old woman holding hands, with the shaky words Grandpa and Grandma scrawled at the top. Grandpa, look. I drew you and Grandma. Ethan held it up high. Harold took the drawing and looked at it for a long time. The old man had crazy white hair. The woman wore a red dress, and they were both smiling, holding hands. His eyes reddened, but he held it back. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. It's beautiful. Grandpa's keeping this. The oatmeal finally got eaten. The coffee was drunk. Outside the window, the sun had shifted from east to west, washing the whole living room in a warm amber glow. When Andrew and Lisa left, Lisa paused at the door, looked back for a long time, and finally said, Dad, Susan, next week, at the lawyer's. We'll come with you. Harold just waved a hand. He didn't say yes or no. But when he turned around, Susan saw the corner of his mouth curl upward. The following Wednesday, Andrew and Lisa showed up. Andrew drove Harold and Susan to the law office. On the way, they passed Lincoln High. Harold looked out the window. The sycamores were bare, but new buds dotted the branches. In a few months, they'd be heavy with leaves. The legal paperwork was straightforward. Signatures, notarizations, copies for everyone. When they walked out, Lisa suddenly called out, Susan, next month, Dad's birthday. Can we come for dinner? Susan smiled and nodded. Harold stood on the steps of the office, looking up at a sky so blue it almost hurt, and took a deep breath. The winter air was cold, but incredibly clean. After that day, life became quiet. Those nights of slammed doors and shouted ultimatums, those afternoons of confrontation in the hallway, they all felt like a storm from a season that was finally over. Andrew started coming by every week, sometimes with a gallon of milk, sometimes with fruit. He never mentioned the assets again, never questioned Susan's background, just sat for a while, talking with his dad about the weather, about Ethan's grades, about business. Lisa started coming by more often too, sometimes with Emily, sometimes alone, and she'd occasionally ask Susan to teach her how to cook. She was clumsy in the kitchen, couldn't dice an onion to save her life, and Susan would laugh gently, take the knife, and show her the right way. Mom, you're so good at this, Lisa said one day. The word mom came out small, tentative, almost a test. Susan's knife paused on the cutting board. She looked up at Lisa, who immediately stared down at the carrots she was mangling, her ears turning bright red. Susan said nothing, just slid the perfectly diced onions over toward Lisa and kept working. But from that day on, Lisa never called her Susan again. Michael came by on weekends. He'd bring some specialty teas and sit on the balcony with Harold, playing chess. The two men would settle into the wicker chairs, the chessboard between them, Susan's orchids all around. They talked about the economy, education policy, art. One day Harold mentioned a particularly troublesome student he'd had back in the day, a kid who used to sneak out of school to play video games. Michael listened, then set down his tea and smiled. "Mr. Chun, what was that student's name?" Harold told him. Michael said, "He was my middle school classmate. He's my CFO now." Harold stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "You kids, you all turned out all right." Michael said, "It was your generation that taught us well." Sunlight fell on the chessboard, the pieces gleaming. Susan came out with a plate of sliced fruit, saw the two of them sitting there in the afternoon sun, and smiled. A month later, Michael arranged a family dinner at a quiet, private restaurant tucked away on a tree-lined street. No outsiders, just Harold, Susan, Andrew's family, Lisa's family, and Michael. The restaurant was unassuming from the outside, but inside was a garden with a koi pond. The fish drifted lazily through the water, and duckweed swayed gently on the surface. The kids ran around the pond while the adults sat around the big round table. There was still a little polite awkwardness. Andrew, the regular working guy, sitting across from Michael, the billionaire. Michael poured Andrew a glass of wine. "Andrew, that business plan you mentioned last month. I had our investment team take a look. There's some real potential there. Come see me next week. Let's talk." Andrew blinked. He'd only mentioned his project in passing. He clinked glasses, said, "Thanks, Michael." Halfway through the meal, Michael stood up with his glass. "I wanted to get everyone together to say something." He looked at Harold. "Mr. Chun, my father passed away when I was young. My mother raised me on her own. All these years, I've been so focused on my work, I couldn't be there for her the way I should have been. But since she met you, she's changed. She laughs more. She's full of life. You've given her something I haven't been able to." He raised his glass toward Harold, inclining his head. "This toast is to you. Thank you for taking care of my mother. From now on, we're family." Harold stood up with his glass of sparkling water. The two men's glasses met with a clear, bright chime. Susan dabbed at her eyes beside him, and Lisa silently slid her a napkin. That night, after everyone had gone home, Michael drove Harold and Susan back to the house. Before he left, he took a box from the car and handed it to Harold. "Mr. Chun, you mentioned once you liked calligraphy. This inkstone, I picked it up at an auction a few years ago. I'm told it's a fine piece. I don't know much about them, but it's wasted sitting in my office. You should have it." Harold opened the box. It was an exquisite inkstone, smooth as silk, with a natural wave pattern in the stone. He ran his thumb across the surface and knew instantly that it was worth far more than Michael's casual "picked it up." But he didn't refuse. He closed the box and put his hand on Michael's shoulder. "Michael, you're like your mother. Solid, steady, full of grace. Good man." Later that night, Harold sat at his desk. He ground fresh ink on the new inkstone, spread out his rice paper, and wrote a line from an old poem. "We walked to where the waters end, and sat to watch the clouds rise." He looked at it for a long while, then added a smaller line at the side. "Found in twilight years, cherished for all remaining days." Susan came in with a cup of warm milk, saw the inscription, and stood there for a very long time. She set the milk down, picked up the brush, and beneath his words, in her own elegant hand, wrote, "Together to dust and ashes, keeping this white-haired vow." Harold took off his reading glasses and took her hand. Moonlight spilled through the study window, falling across the wet ink, making it glisten. Neither of them said a word. But some things never needed to be spoken. Another spring morning. Harold on the balcony watering the orchids, Susan in the kitchen frying eggs. On the radio, an old song was playing. Harold hummed along, off-key. Susan didn't correct him. She poked her head out of the kitchen and watched his silhouette in the sunshine. 73 years old, back still straight, carefully watering each plant. Not too much, not too little. She remembered the day they met. He'd sat down beside her, spread out his paper, and attacked the page with his brush, as if putting every ounce of strength into the ink. She'd glanced over and said his yin style had good bones but needed fluidity. He'd looked at her and said, "You know calligraphy?" And she'd said, "A little." The truth was, she'd known it even then. This old man with his bold brushstrokes didn't lack fluidity. He lacked a person. Now here she was, standing in his kitchen, her apron on, frying his favorite eggs. And there he was on the balcony, watering the flowers, humming off-key. The sunlight blanketed them both, warm and golden. This was it. The best of days. No grand declarations. No fiery passion. Just watering the flowers in the morning, riding together at night, and the kids coming home for a noisy dinner now and then. At their age, that was everything.